I'd love to know where you're watching from. Your comments always remind me how far these stories can travel across the world. It truly means a lot to share these moments with you. If you're enjoying the journey, kindly subscribe to the channel and join our growing community of story lovers. London, 1813. The city glittered beneath a thin mist of coal smoke and candlelight, a kingdom of silks and secrets. The war with Napoleon raged across the Channel, yet here, amid the ballrooms and drawing rooms of the elite, another kind of battle persisted. One fought not with muskets but with smiles. The Prince Regent season had begun, and every family with a title or a desperate need for one descended upon the capital, armed with ambition disguised as civility. It was a time when a glance could determine a fortune, and a dance might seal an empire. Amidst this restless theatre of wealth and whispers stood Alexander Hawthorne, the Duke of Ashbourne. He had returned from the Peninsular Campaign with medals, scars, and a silence that unnerved even his closest allies. London praised him as a hero, yet few dared to look into his eyes for long. They were the color of stormlight, unforgiving, restless, capable of drowning anyone foolish enough to gaze too deep. Once he had been the Prince Regent's favored soldier, but glory had curdled into weariness. He found no comfort in victory, no solace in the marble corridors of his restored estate. His Duchess had died 2 winters past, leaving behind a portrait that watched him from every room. Society, quick to adore tragedy, turned his mourning into legend. Women whispered of his loneliness as if it were a prize to be won. He did not dance. He did not linger. He moved through gatherings like a shadow in uniform, commanding respect and distance in equal measure. Across town, in a modest but dignified house near Berkeley Square, Lady Evelyn Pembroke watched the same season from a different window. Her father, once the Earl of Windermere, had died leaving more debts than dowries. Her mother's health waned beneath the strain of maintaining appearances, while her brother gambled away what little remained of their inheritance. Evelyn was their last hope, a daughter whose beauty and intellect might mend the family name through a marriage of convenience. Yet she, too, was weary. The gilded smiles of suitors who saw her as an acquisition rather than a person had worn thin. Still, she performed her part. Each night she dressed in gowns refitted from her mother's youth. Each morning she practiced the art of conversation that revealed nothing and promised everything. It was at a musicale in Grosvenor Square that their paths first brushed the same air. The Pembrokes had been granted invitation by a distant cousin eager to appear charitable. Evelyn stood near the grand piano, her posture elegant but alert, observing the dancers through a haze of candlelight and perfume. She had become skilled at reading people, the false laughter, the subtle hierarchies of who bowed to whom. And then she saw him, the Duke of Ashbourne. He stood apart from the crowd, a tall, composed figure in black. His expression neither bored nor interested but simply detached, as though the glittering room belonged to another world. Conversation seemed to hush around him, like a tide retreating. Evelyn felt an inexplicable pull, the kind born not of vanity but of recognition, an understanding of isolation beneath the facade. For a fleeting instant, his gaze met hers. It was not the look of a man measuring beauty, but of one startled by a memory. She felt as if he saw through the silk and artifice straight to the restlessness within her. Then the moment passed. A march began. The dancers resumed. When she looked again, he was gone. Later that evening, as carriages rattled away and laughter spilled into the cold air, Evelyn found herself unable to forget him. Not the title, not the reputation, but the stillness he carried, like the pause between thunder and rain. Yet reason scolded her fascination. A widowed duke would never entangle himself with the daughter of a bankrupt earl. Romance was a luxury reserved for those whose lives were secure. Still, when she closed her eyes that night, she saw the reflection of his gaze flickering in candlelight, a silent question neither had dared to ask. The Duke, too, remembered. He had seen hundreds of faces since his return, each painted with admiration or envy, but hers lingered, open, unguarded, quietly defiant. He had once believed that women of society were all the same, polished creatures shaped by expectation. Yet this one had looked at him not as the hero London adored, but as a man who might still bleed. He found himself thinking of her during his solitary rides across Hyde Park, wondering if her laughter matched the intelligence in her eyes. Such thoughts unsettled him. Desire had long been a stranger. Duty had been his only companion. As winter melted into spring, London quickened with new energy. Invitations multiplied, alliances shifted, and rumor fluttered through parlors like restless birds. The Duke, though resistant to society's noise, was not immune to the summons of politics. The Prince Regent required his presence at the upcoming Carlton House ball, a spectacle meant to display England's resilience amid war. Attendance was not a request. And so, he prepared himself once more to endure an evening of empty words and too bright chandeliers. Evelyn, too, received an invitation to the same ball, her mother's triumph after months of maneuvering. It was, she knew, her family's final chance. The Marquis of Blackwood had shown increasing interest in her, drawn less by affection than by lineage. He was handsome in a deliberate way, his charm smooth as polished silver, his ambitions wrapped in courtesy. To marry him would rescue her mother, secure her brother, and restore the Pembroke name. Yet even as she rehearsed her gratitude, her heart remained curiously still. The night of the ball arrived in a cascade of light. Carlton House blazed with candles. Music floated through vast marble halls. The air shimmered with perfume and expectation. The Duke entered to murmurs of recognition. The war hero, the widower, the man who had once commanded regiments now commanding silence by mere presence. Across the room, Evelyn stood among a cluster of debutantes, her gown of pale ivory catching the light like frost. The Marquis of Blackwood approached, confident and practiced, bowing with the precision of a man certain of his victory. Their conversation flowed as etiquette demanded, pleasant, meaningless. Evelyn smiled where she must, laughed where expected, yet her eyes, as if led by instinct, drifted beyond him. The Duke of Ashbourne had turned toward her. Their gazes locked once more, and time seemed to falter. She felt the weight of it, the history behind his stance, the restraint beneath his poise. He looked as though he had stepped from the edge of battle straight into this fragile world of fans and violins. Something within her stirred, an impulse both dangerous and undeniable. She smiled, perhaps to steady herself, perhaps in defiance of her fate. That single gesture bridged the distance between them more surely than any introduction. The Duke's jaw tightened. Around them, the dance continued, but the room's rhythm had changed. Evelyn did not yet understand what had been set in motion, only that her life, once neatly arranged within duty's confines, now trembled with possibility. And across the crowded ballroom, the Duke of Ashbourne exhaled, a decision forming behind his calm exterior. He had lived too long within the shadows of loss and decorum. Something in that smile, quiet, fearless, had awakened what the war and grief had buried. The music swelled, the crowd shimmered, and London's most reserved man felt, for the first time in years, the undeniable pull of desire. The chandeliers of Carlton House glimmered like captured stars, their light cascading upon jewels, epaulets, and eager faces. The orchestra's first notes unfurled through the hall, elegant and expectant, as if even the instruments knew that reputations would rise and fall before the final waltz. The Prince Regent presided over his spectacle with indulgent satisfaction, unaware, or perhaps entirely aware, that beneath the shimmer of his court, ambition and desire coiled like unseen smoke. For many, this night was merely another step upon the social ladder. For the Duke of Ashbourne, it was an ordeal of endurance. Yet for Lady Evelyn Pembroke, it was the narrow bridge between salvation and ruin. She had been coached to perfection. Her mother's trembling hands had pinned the final pearl in her hair, whispering prayers that this night would restore what years of misfortune had taken. Evelyn had smiled as dutiful daughters do, but within her chest thudded a heart too alive for resignation. The Marquis of Blackwood was expected to propose before the season's end. His interest in her had been marked and persistent, and she understood precisely what it meant. To refuse him would be madness, to accept him a kind of slow death. Yet she had learned to wear serenity as armor. When he approached her near the mirrored wall, his compliments rehearsed and precise, she answered with the calm of a woman who knew her role in the scene. The Marquis was handsome, certainly, his hair dark, his eyes calculating, his every gesture an advertisement of control. He spoke of the war as though it were a distant inconvenience, of Parliament as though it were a stage awaiting his entrance. He admired Evelyn's composure, her intelligence, even her restraint, but his admiration was that of a collector assessing a rare artifact. She knew it. And yet, when he extended his hand and requested the next dance, she accepted. It was expected. Her mother's future, her brother's safety, her family's fragile dignity, all hovered upon the arc of her smile. Across the ballroom, the Duke of Ashbourne observed the scene with an intensity that defied his usual detachment. His years in command had trained him to read the smallest shifts of expression, the unspoken strategies behind polite behavior. He saw the calculation in Blackwood's eyes, the weariness in Evelyn's smile. It stirred something long dormant in him, a memory of protecting those who could not speak freely, of standing between the innocent and the opportunistic. Yet this was no battlefield, and he had no right to intervene. Still, his hand tightened around the glass he held until the crystal trembled. When the dance began, Evelyn moved with effortless precision, her body following rhythm even as her mind wandered. Blackwood's conversation flowed like honeyed poison, praise laced with insinuation, promises folded within veiled command. "You understand, my dear Lady Evelyn," he murmured as they turned beneath the chandeliers. "Society demands certain alliances. Practicality must always precede sentiment." She smiled, though her pulse quickened with distaste. "Indeed," she said lightly. "Practicality is the foundation of every successful arrangement." He mistook her irony for agreement and smiled in triumph. The Duke's composure broke when he saw Blackwood's hand linger too long upon hers. The air seemed to narrow between them, and for the first time since returning from the war, he felt the sharp, reckless certainty of action. He set down his glass, straightened his coat, and began to cross the ballroom. Conversations faltered in his wake. The orchestra, oblivious to the quiet tremor spreading through the crowd, played on. Heads turned as the Duke's boots echoed across the marble, each step deliberate, unhurried, commanding. Evelyn noticed before anyone else. Her breath caught, though she could not have said why. Blackwood followed her gaze, his expression curdling into something darker. The Duke reached them at the precise moment the music slowed. The air between the three of them thickened with tension, visible almost as heat. "My lord," Blackwood began, his tone edged with forced civility, "surely you mean to join another set?" The Duke inclined his head slightly, his voice low but carrying. "I believe this one will suffice." He turned to Evelyn, his eyes steady upon hers. "Lady Evelyn," he said, and the sound of her name in his voice silenced the entire hall, "you have danced enough with politics for one evening. Dance with me." The words were not a request. He extended his hand, gloved and sure. For one heartbeat, no one breathed. Then, astonishing even herself, Evelyn placed her hand in his. Gasps rippled through the assembly as the Duke drew her into the center of the floor. The orchestra hesitated, uncertain whether to continue, until the Prince Regent himself, amused and delighted by scandal, gestured for the music to play. The waltz resumed, soft at first, then swelling as if aware it was witnessing history. The first turn of the dance was electric. Evelyn's pulse raced, her senses overwhelmed by the closeness of him, the scent of leather and faint tobacco, the restrained power in his movements. The Duke guided her with a precision born of command, his hand firm yet reverent at her waist. "You should not have," she whispered, scarcely daring to look up. "No," he replied, his tone quiet but absolute, "but I would again." They moved as though the world had fallen away. Conversation ceased, only the sweep of their motion and the orchestra's rhythm remained. The scandal was immediate, whispers blooming like wildfire, but neither seemed to hear. For Evelyn, the dance was liberation disguised as impropriety. For the Duke, it was resurrection. Every turn drew them closer, not merely in proximity but in truth. They did not speak further, for words would have broken the fragile miracle of understanding between them. When the final note trembled into silence, he released her hand slowly, as though letting go of something irreplaceable. The room erupted in murmurs. Blackwood's expression was a mask of restrained fury. The Prince Regent's amused smile flickered into curiosity. Evelyn curtsied, her face pale but composed. The Duke bowed, then turned and walked away without another word. The crowd parted for him instinctively, a silent recognition of power they could neither sanction nor defy. Evelyn stood motionless, her heart unsteady beneath the weight of consequence. In that single waltz, she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She had defied expectation, embarrassed a suitor, and tethered her name to scandal. Yet, instead of dread, she felt a strange calm. It was as if she had stepped, finally, into her own life. Around her, the ballroom resumed its glittering pretense, but she no longer belonged to its illusions. Blackwood approached, his smile thin as paper. "An impressive display," he murmured. "You and His Grace have provided the ton with quite the evening's entertainment." She met his gaze evenly. "Then let them be entertained," she said. His hand tightened upon his cane, but he said no more. He bowed and retreated, his pride bleeding beneath his composure. Outside, the night air was sharp with the scent of rain. The Duke paused at the foot of the marble steps, his breath visible in the cold. He looked back once through the open doors, where music and light spilled into the darkness. He knew what he had done. In a society ruled by decorum, he had declared war upon propriety itself. Yet for the first time since the battlefield, he felt alive, not as a duke, not as a soldier, but as a man who had chosen desire over duty. Inside, Evelyn stood still as the next waltz began without her. The chandeliers gleamed above, indifferent witnesses to her awakening. The night had not ended, but something within her old life had. She knew the cost would be great. Still, as the orchestra swelled again, she could not help the faint, dangerous smile that curved her lips, one that promised the story was only beginning. Morning broke pale and unforgiving over London, as if the city itself disapproved of what had transpired beneath the chandeliers of Carlton House. The newspapers had wasted no time. By dawn, whispers had taken written form. "The Duke of Ashbourne's indiscretion," one headline declared with gleeful venom. Beneath it, lines of speculation dripped with feigned sympathy for Lady Evelyn Pembroke, whose reputation now teetered like a candle in the wind. Within drawing-rooms and tea-parlors, women murmured in tones that masked envy as pity. Men smirked behind brandy glasses, wagering how swiftly the Duke would retreat into the fortress of his rank. In less than a night, 2 lives had become the currency of gossip. At Pembroke House, silence clung to the walls. Evelyn sat by the window, her mother's tears a soft, rhythmic background to her own stillness. The scandal had arrived before breakfast, carried by a trembling footman, confirmed by a letter from a friend too loyal not to warn her. Her mother spoke of exile, of fleeing to the countryside until the storm passed. Her brother, pale and ashamed, muttered apologies that meant little. His debts had started this descent, and now her name bore the cost. Evelyn listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The weight of consequence was real, yet beneath it stirred something new, a calm born not of resignation, but of certainty. She had not been ruined by the Duke's action, she had been revealed by it. Across the city, the Duke of Ashbourne faced his own reckoning. Advisers and acquaintances came to his estate under the guise of concern but stayed to issue warnings. A duke, they reminded him, could not afford impropriety. The Crown watched. Parliament whispered. The Prince Regent's amusement might turn to reproach. His steward, grave and loyal, urged distance. "Your Grace, the lady will survive. Time will favor forgetfulness." The Duke's answer was measured but resolute. "I have no interest in being favored by time," he said. "Only by truth." Yet even truth, he knew, required courage to bear its cost. By evening, London had settled into its routine of scandal-fed delight. Invitations to Lady Evelyn ceased. The Marquis of Blackwood, wounded in pride and ambition, visited her under the pretense of concern. His expression was a study in magnanimous restraint. "You have been ill-used, my lady," he said, pacing before her hearth. "But all may yet be salvaged. I would still have you as my wife, if you will accept the humility of repair." His words stung like a brand. She met his gaze without flinching. "Repair," she repeated softly. "You speak as though I were an ornament chipped by mishandling." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "You forget yourself. I offer you protection." Her reply was quiet but unyielding. "And I decline it." The refusal stunned him. No one, least of all a woman in disgrace, had ever dismissed him so calmly. "Do you imagine," he said coldly, "that Ashbourne will marry you now?" His gallantry was theatre. His kind do not risk crowns for sentiment. Evelyn's voice remained steady. "Then let the stage be mine alone." He bowed stiffly, his anger controlled but deadly. When he departed, she felt both triumph and dread. The battle for her dignity had begun, and she stood upon uncertain ground. The Duke's struggle was of another kind. That night, he sat before the fire, reading and rereading a letter he had written but not yet sealed. Its words were neither apology nor plea, but confession, a soldier's honesty laid bare upon paper. He wrote of how her courage had unsettled him, how her smile at another man had shown him what he feared most, that he had grown indifferent to life. He admitted that his crossing of the ballroom had been both madness and salvation. Yet the ink blurred beneath his hand. He had faced cannon fire without hesitation, but the prospect of offering his heart left him paralyzed. To love her openly meant defiance not only of society, but of the careful order he had built to survive grief. 2 days passed before he resolved to act. Rain swept across London as he rode through the streets, his coat dark with weather, determination in every motion. At Pembroke House, servants scattered before his arrival. Evelyn met him in the drawing-room, her posture regal despite exhaustion. The silence between them was not awkward but charged, heavy with all that had gone unspoken. "You should not have come," she said, though her voice wavered. "Perhaps not," he answered, "but neither should I have left that ballroom without you." She turned from him, gripping the back of a chair. "Do you know what they say of me?" He approached, but kept his distance. "They say what they always say when truth frightens them." Her laugh was soft, bitter. "Truth? You speak of truth as if it can feed a family or erase a reputation." He regarded her quietly, his expression stripped of arrogance. "I speak of the kind that gives meaning to both." She faced him then, eyes bright with fury and tears. "And what meaning do you give this scandal, my lord? Was it pity? Amusement? A moment's rebellion against boredom?" He shook his head. "It was remembrance of what it means to feel alive. You reminded me." The words hung between them, trembling with sincerity. For a moment, she could not speak. He took a breath. "Evelyn, I cannot undo what has been done, but I will not allow them to make you pay for my courage." She studied him, searching for the man behind the title, the soldier behind the grace. "And what would you do?" she asked quietly. "Propose? Marry me to silence their tongues? You, who owes nothing to anyone." His voice softened. "To you, I owe everything." The rain intensified, drumming against the windows like applause. She stepped closer, her defiance fading into weary candor. "If I marry you, I lose myself to gratitude. If I refuse, I lose what little future I have left. Do you see the cruelty of choice you offer me?" His gaze held hers steadily. "Then let us make it no choice at all. Let it be a partnership, equal, if the world cannot yet name it so. Let it be what it was meant to be when I took your hand, a decision, not a rescue." Evelyn's composure wavered. The truth of him, his steadiness, his humility, disarmed her more completely than his grandeur ever could. She realized that his defiance had not been for spectacle but for her, and that she had already chosen, though pride had not allowed her to admit it. Slowly, she extended her hand once more. "Then it begins here," she said softly. "Not in forgiveness, but in understanding." He bowed his head, taking her hand as though accepting a command. No audience bore witness, no orchestra played. Only the storm outside marked the moment, fierce and unrelenting. In the days that followed, London's appetite for scandal moved on to new prey. The Duke and Lady Evelyn appeared rarely in public, but when they did, whispers shifted to reluctant admiration. Their union, when it came, was not announced with fanfare but sealed with quiet conviction. Those who sought gossip found none, those who sought meaning found a legend. Years later, people still spoke of that night at Carlton House, when a man of rank and a woman of grace had defied an empire of manners with one dance. And somewhere in the memory of London's glittering past, beneath chandeliers long dimmed, their story remained, a reminder that even in an age of restraint, love could still demand courage, and courage could still redeem the heart.